Good morning. I'm the Reverend Jacqueline Sheldon from St. Paul's Episcopal Church at 220 Valley Street in Willimantic, and I'm delighted to be with you. Well, this Wednesday, we will be celebrating in the church Ash Wednesday. That is the beginning of Lent. And Lent in the Episcopal Church is a journey of 40 days in which we think about how hard it is for us to really receive and believe in and trust in the love of God. And we do that because we're opening ourselves up in order to experience the mystery of Jesus's passion, his death and sacrifice, and his amazing resurrection on Easter Sunday, which is at the end of this journey. This pattern of doing 40 days of preparation before we come to Holy Week and Easter has been around for hundreds of years. And even early on, every one of the Gospels, when you really think about it, what they're doing is they're intending to tell us this story that's so hard to understand and put our minds around, as it was for them as well, about this Holy One, the Son of God, who came and sacrificed his life so that we would know love and that we would know God was always with us. Just trying to tell that story, every one of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, have the full intention of trying to help us know what happened the best they can and help us to be able to receive it into our own lives. And in order to do that, they talk about how really, honest to God, stiff-necked we are in trying to receive that. So this year, to open our hearts up and allow us to believe even more deeply in how much this magnificent love is with us at all times and wanting to be with us, we're going to listen to the Gospel of Luke. And the thing about Luke is that Luke wants to tell us the story about Jesus's sacrifice and his death and his resurrection. He wants to tell us from the idea of the story of the first Exodus. And Exodus is the second book in the First Testament of our Bible. And that story is all about God taking the Israelites who are in slavery and imprisoned in Egypt and bringing them out and leading them through Moses for 40 years through the desert to the promised land. And it's all about how God is developing his relationship with these people and building their relationship to a place where they trust in God more than anything else in their lives and turn to God all the time, realizing that God can give them all that they need to be sustained and to make the best decisions to live a free life filled with love for one another, for God, for the earth, for themselves. And it's all about the story of us as human beings not really trusting that. I mean, if you look at it this way, this is just something I've come up recently with, is that if you think about God loving us so tremendously and wanting us to turn always to this love in order to make the best decisions and fully express ourselves in the world, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's hard to trust that. And so there's this great love that dwells in us, but there's also this great love that dwells in us we have to understand is beyond our understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean that this love is outside us, orchestrating events. But what it really means is that this love is so great that its way of being is beyond our understanding. And so we have to continually open our hearts and humble ourselves to understand more deeply that this love is really with us and really loves us and wants to lead us at all times. And that's hard because a lot of times it feels like when we're not sure of what answer to give or how to live our lives, it's really hard because it's hard to trust that there's this love that we can't fully comprehend that will communicate with us. especially because often we're waiting a while before we get an answer. And it's typically the reason we're waiting a while before we get an answer is because we already have an answer in mind. And when that answer doesn't come that way, we keep waiting until finally something becomes obvious about a better way for us to love. And that's what I mean by how we can't always understand the ways of God's love, but God continually wants to be with us and among us and leading us. So this story that Luke tells is about how actually God decides that God will dwell among us, even though we're rebellious and we're doubtful and, as God describes us, stiff-necked and not willing to trust that God will do everything we need and loves us so much will do anything for us. So we have to back up to the story of Exodus before we read today's story in Luke's Gospel of the Transfiguration. We have to back up and look at what I mean by that. So if we go back into the 32nd chapter of Exodus, we see that God has brought the people through Moses out of Egypt, and he's settled them so that they can make this covenant, this agreement that God will always be their God and God will always be with them and God will always be loving and leading them. And they will trust in God and they will obey what God calls them to do. They're in this spot in the 32nd chapter where this is happening. God takes Moses up on a mountain to hammer out the 10 commandments, which are going to be the agreement to the covenant of the people living with God. And the people are down below waiting for him. So what happens? Well, it's not a pretty picture. While Moses is up there, the Israelites decide that it's taking Moses too long and that they can't trust him. And so they turn to Aaron, Moses' brother, who's down tending them. And they say, listen, we don't know where this guy is. He's taking too long. We need to make a God that can lead us through this time. So Aaron says, okay, everybody collect all your jewelry and everything and all your gold and bring it to me and we'll fashion a golden calf. So while Moses and God are hammering out this agreement of love on the mountain, the rest of the Israelites, out of lack of trust and anxiety, go ahead and make this golden calf and start worshiping the calf. So that is when Moses comes down, there they are worshiping the calf, and it's not pretty. God is furious. Moses is furious to the point where Moses has to go back and talk to God and say, listen, God says, that's it, I'm done. And Moses says, no, listen, you can't do that. You got to stay with us. You got to help us. And he says, just think of it this way. If you leave us and we die in the desert without you, what are the rest of the nations going to think of you? What about your reputation, God? So God relents on that conversation. Pretty amazing conversation, right? But God talks about the fact, he says, you know what? Here's the thing. All right, I'll be with you, but I'm not going to be amongst you. I will be with you outside. Create the tent of meeting where I'll come and meet with you, Moses, but I can't be in the midst of these people because they're so stiff-necked that if I'm in the midst of them, I'm going to kill them. So, kind of reminds me of how I felt at different times towards other people where, they just are too much for me. So the truth of the matter is throughout the rest of Exodus, God never is actually amongst the people. The way it works is God is in the tent of meeting, and Moses has to put this veil on because when he goes to meet with God, his face shines and he comes out and it scares the people. So he puts on a veil. So every time he's with God, the veil gets removed so he can be with God. And then he comes back out, puts the veil on and talks to the people. So Moses is always the go-between between God and the people in the story of Exodus and the journey of the people on the way. And God is with them, but not amongst them. So we need to know that story, and that's the story that Luke knows when he tells the story of the Transfiguration. Because in the Transfiguration that Luke is talking about, it's the only place where Luke uses the word for Exodus about Jesus that lets us know that he's saying Jesus is the new Moses. And this is the second Exodus into the promised land of love with God. And this is going to be different now. This is going to be very different. So with that being said, I'm going to read you the story from the Transfiguration today, and we're going to talk about what that difference is. So this is the story. About 8 days later, Jesus takes Peter and James and John up on the mountain to be alone and pray. As he's praying to God, there the appearance of his face began to change, and his clothes turned white as snow. 2 men appeared and began to talk with him. One was the prophet of old, Elijah, and the other was the ancient lawmaker Moses. They were shining like the sun and were talking to him about his crossing over from this life to the next, which would take place in Jerusalem. Peter and the others were deep asleep, but they woke up and shook the sleep from their eyes. They saw Jesus with his face and clothes shining. They also saw the 2 men standing with him. As the men with him turned to go, Peter spoke out, saying, without thinking, Jesus, this is a good place to stay. Let us make tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was saying this, a bright cloud from above began to fall on them, and their knees shook as the clouds surrounded them. A voice spoke from the cloud saying, "This is my son, the one whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice finished speaking, they saw Jesus standing there alone in front of them. After this, they kept silent and told no one at the time what they had seen. The next day, when Jesus finished coming down from the mountain, a large crowd was there. A man called out from the crowd, "Jesus," he said with desperation in his voice, "I beg you, have pity on my son, my only child." A spirit takes hold of him, making him scream out loud. Then foam comes out of his mouth. It seldom stops tormenting him, leaving him beaten and bruised. I asked your followers to force this spirit out from him, and they tried, but they failed. Your generation is bent and twisted with no faith, Jesus said. How much longer will I have to put up with you? Bring your son to me. As they were bringing the boy to him, the evil spirit took hold of him and threw the boy to the ground. But Jesus spoke sharply, and the evil spirit left, healing the boy. He gave him back to his father. Everyone stood there in awe of Jesus' great power. The gospel of the Lord. So if you look at that story, what Luke is doing and the labor that he's making, he's giving us a reflection of the story of Moses on the mountain and with the people. You see, in that place where he said he's talking to Moses and Elijah about his departure to his life after being here, that word departure is the same word for Exodus that is the title of the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, and that word is used nowhere else in the New Testament. So we can be safe and sure that this story is about Jesus being the second Moses, and this about the Exodus now for us into the new life with God. So what do we see here? Well, we see first things first is that Jesus shows us what's most important about being in this new life, which is praying to God. He goes up on the mountain to pray. Over and over again, we'll see references in every single gospel about Jesus going alone to be with God, to talk to God personally and intimately about his journey and what he's doing. The second thing that's interesting in this story, well, there's plenty of interesting, but the second thing that I want to point out is that as this transformation happens and this light shines, remember I was telling you how Moses' face had light shining on it, how this light, this touch with God is transforming. And so Moses has his first transformation, and Jesus turns light and bright, and he also has that same image as Moses. But now here are some things that we need to see that are also similar, and then move forward into what this means for us in our journey in Lent, and what it means for us to grab hold of what it means that Jesus has died for us. And so here's what I want to say. In this story, when Jesus comes down the mountain, you notice how it's like kind of odd. He goes into this whole thing about how he's annoyed because this child can't have the demon cast out of him by Jesus's followers who were down on the mountain below waiting. It's not a little bit like the people in Israel making a golden calf because they can't trust in waiting for Jesus? For Moses. It's kind of the same thing, and Jesus responds in the same way God responded. Remember, God said, I can't even be amongst these people. If I am amongst them, I will kill them because I'm so aggravated with their lack of faith and trust and belief. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? So here we see the difference of what happens. In Moses' case, Moses becomes the go-between between God and the people because God just can't be amongst them. But in Jesus' case, Jesus goes to his death, never leaving us, never leaving the people. He never gets so, he allows us out of our stiff-necked, doubtful, painful selves to kill him instead of him killing us. Imagine that. Just imagine that for a minute. He goes through his arrest. He goes through the Sanhedrin. He goes through getting slapped and beaten and tortured. He goes through being nailed to the cross and never, ever, ever tries to destroy or walk away from any of it. He stays amongst us. And in this story, what we see in the end is that God has chosen no longer to need a go-between. Even the other powerful thing in the story is that at the end, after Jesus is on the cross, he never ever gives up his trust and his belief in God. He says, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" He doesn't say there is no God. He acknowledges that God is always there and he can't understand. It's beyond him to understand at that moment on the cross. Even though he's the Son of God, he says, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" Revealing to us that same kind of painful doubt, but he does not give up. And in the end, 3 days later, he's risen from the dead and new life. The new life has come, the new Exodus, the new land to be in, the land of trust and believing in the love of God is with us. So this Lent, we're going to think about this a lot. We're going to think about what it means that God loves us this much, that God decided to be amongst us and let us be our worst selves and still be with us. As you listen to the song "Take It Easy" by Porter's Gate, just think about this Lent and imagine yourself learning to take it easy because God loves you. Amen.
Take it easy, easy. God already loves you completely. Take it easy, easy. Rest in the shade of his wings. Lay down your burdens and rest for a while. The shepherd who seeks you is gentle and kind. There's nothing to pay for and nothing to earn, nothing you have to become. Take it easy, easy. God already loves you completely. Take it easy, easy. Rest in the shade of his wings. Lay down the scales where you weigh out your life. The measures are empty, just leave them behind. The distance between his two hands are enough to tell you the depths of his love. Take it easy, easy. God already loves you completely. Take it easy, easy. Rest in the shade of his wings. easy, easy. Rest in the shade of his wings. Take it easy, easy. God already loves you completely. Take it easy, easy. Rest in the shade of his wings. Rest in the shade of his wings. Rest in the shade of his wings.